All right. For more on this, we are now being joined by Peter Kuznick, professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Peter, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. What a way to start the new year. Well, the FBI for now is saying that there is no links between the two attacks. There are strange similarities between the military background of the New Orleans and the Las Vegas attackers, the way they rented those vehicles. Does it indicate a problem of extremism within the U.S. military?
There is certainly a problem of extremism within the U.S. military. We know that there are many white supremacists in the U.S. military. There are much fewer devotees and supporters of ISIS in the U.S. military. That's the shocker. The fact that the Livelsberger, who detonated the car at the Trump Hotel in New Orleans, is a devoted Trump follower, that is not surprising. And many of those people, or some of them at least, are white supremacists and represent something but very, very different in that regard than Jabbar, who is a supporter of ISIS. So there's a lot of different kinds of extremism. You have to remember that both of them deployed to Afghanistan. Both of them have lived within a culture of violence, and that the United States is awash in guns. So you put all these things together, the military training, various kinds of extreme ideas, access to guns. So it's not surprising, but it's very disturbing that this took place. And we know that the military does not do a very good job of rooting out extremism.
Peter, how can one find out if any soldier or army veteran is radicalized?
It's very hard to find that out, partly because they've got certain First Amendment rights and rights to privacy. Don't have as much right to privacy as other citizens do. So if the army was more vigilant in monitoring that, they could root out a lot of it. The problem is that many of the people who join the military have more proclivities toward violence and potential extremism than others. Generally, the education level is lower than in other areas of the country and other parts of the economy. And so, and they, much of this radicalization, especially in the case of Jabbar, takes place online. So it's out of sight of most of the ways that we would be able to root this out. So it's going to be a problem, but we know that there's a lot of extremism, and the authorities know that, and they generally choose to turn a blind eye because it could be useful for them in some of these situations. So there needs to be much closer monitoring, and hopefully what occurred in these two instances is going to raise a red flag, and people will take this much more seriously. But let me make
All
one
right.
other
Well, thank you
point.
so much for all of that. Yeah,
The other
please.
point to say is that we live in a country and a world that's awash in violence right now. And people believe that violence is an acceptable way of solving problems. I just got back from the Nobel Peace Prize ceremonies in Oslo. And these are people who are dedicated to finding other ways to solve problems. But the U.S. is fueling the wars in Ukraine, U.S. fueling the war in Gaza and the Middle East. So it's not surprising that some violence in such a violent world is going to blow back on us. Now, ISIS is a concern. ISIS had largely been rooted out in Iraq and Syria because it used to control a lot of territory, and then it's been greatly, greatly reduced and minimized. But now ISIS is feeling a resurgence, especially in Syria. Given the chaos in Syria, ISIS is trying to make a comeback there. So this kind of extremism is alarming, dangerous, and the Americans and people all over
Mm,
have got to be
yeah.
much more vigilant again.
That's very true. There's concerns already whether or not there'll be copycat attacks like the ones we saw on New Year's Day. We'll be following this story, of course, very closely, and of course, those concerns about the resurgence of ISIS. Peter, I appreciate your comments and your analysis. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.